You think you know the 90s? Think again. Beneath the flannel shirts, the booming malls, and the grunge anthems that defined a generation lies a chapter almost forgotten. A chilling reality that played out under the buzzing lights of neon arcades. Back then, malls were the beating heart of suburban life. A weekend ritual. Kids with pockets full of quarters, parents with shopping bags, the food court alive with chatter, and in the corner, always glowing like a beacon, the arcade. It was a sanctuary of sound and light, rows of pinball machines, flashing cabinets promising high scores and bragging rights, teenagers laughing with soda-stained fingers. Parents trusted these places, saw them as safe, a break from the streets outside. For a while, the arcade was freedom, a little world where kids could disappear for hours in the glow of the screens. But some disappeared for real. This is not just nostalgia. This is not just about tokens and tickets and crane machines that never gave up the prize. This is about the shadows that crept into those safe spaces. The predators who understood one thing better than anyone else. Children felt untouchable in the arcade, and that made them vulnerable. Through the 1990s, a string of disappearances began to rattle communities across America. Not in dark alleys, not in isolated parks, but in the very places parents thought were safest. Brightly lit, filled with noise, right under everyone's noses. Imagine the horror of walking into the arcade to collect your child, only to find the game still flashing, the soda half empty, the tokens unused, but the child gone. No one noticed them leave. No one saw who they left with. The 90s gave us Nirvana, Beanie Babies, and the World Wide Web. But it also gave us a chilling series of cold cases that remain unsolved to this day. Families still waiting, communities still haunted, and questions that, decades later, refuse to fade. This isn't just a trip back in time, it's a descent into a forgotten nightmare. The cases that pulled the curtain back on our illusion of safety. The stories that changed how we look at public spaces forever. Because the truth is this, the arcade was never just about fun. For some, it became the last place they were ever seen alive. Step back into a Saturday afternoon in 1993. The mall is alive. The air smells of buttered popcorn from the food court, cinnamon pretzels warming under heat lamps, the faint scent of perfume drifting from department store counters. Shoppers move in tides, parents hunting sales, teenagers leaning against railings in packs, the hum of escalators carrying the rhythm of suburban life. But for the kids, there was only one destination, a glowing paradise tucked between a record store and a shoe shop. The arcade, you could hear it before you saw it. A storm of 8-bit melodies, coins clinking against metal slots, digital voices shouting game over, and insert coin. The carpet beneath your sneakers was patterned in dizzying neon, designed to hide spills and stains but forever sticky with soda. Inside, kids lined up for Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat, Daytona USA, the giants of their day. The glow of the machines painted faces in blues and greens, every button mash a small victory. Every win announced with laughter that cut through the chaos. For many, this was freedom. Parents would hand over $5 in tokens and say, "I'll be back in an hour." That trust was unshakable. The arcade felt enclosed, safe, watched over by teenagers behind the counter, usually more interested in their Walkmans than anything else. No one thought twice about leaving kids there unsupervised. After all, what could happen in a place so bright, so crowded, so full of life? And that's exactly what made it dangerous. The illusion of safety was perfect. The arcade wasn't a back alley. It wasn't a shadowy street corner. It was the very heart of the community. Yet predators understood something most parents didn't. Safety can be an illusion, and noise can be the perfect camouflage. Think about it. In an arcade, kids came and went constantly, doors opening and closing, friends darting between stores. The crowd shifted every 5 minutes, making it nearly impossible to notice when one child quietly slipped away, or when someone walked them out. There were no cell phones buzzing in pockets, no parents texting to check in. Once you were dropped off, you were on your own until pickup. If you didn't show up at the meeting spot, the panic didn't set in right away. Parents assumed you were still on your favorite game, still feeding quarters into machines, still lost in the glow, the reality. That delay, even just 30 minutes, could be everything. This was the 90s. Security cameras were rare. Mall guards strolled occasionally, more concerned with shoplifters than missing children. The arcade attendants, teenagers working minimum wage, barely noticing faces, let alone memorizing them. The predators knew this. They counted on it. And in the middle of all that noise, all that flashing light, they found the perfect hunting ground. But to understand the shock these communities felt when the disappearances began, you have to remember the mindset of the time. Parents in the 90s trusted public spaces in a way that feels almost foreign today. Kids were expected to roam malls, ride bikes across town, disappear into a world without constant digital supervision. That trust was part of childhood. It was part of freedom. So when the first stories began to emerge, a child gone missing, not from a dark street, but from the arcade, the most public place imaginable, it shook people to their core. It was unthinkable. The brightly lit arcade was supposed to be the safest escape a child could have. Instead, it became the perfect disguise for something far darker. The disappearances never started with a scream. They didn't begin with chaos or alarms or rushing security guards. They began quietly, almost invisibly, one child at a time. Let's go back to the spring of 1992. It was a Saturday at Mall in Ohio. 11-year-old Daniel Mercer had begged his mum for just one more hour at the arcade while she shopped for Easter clothes. He was given $5 in tokens, a Coke, and a reminder. "Stay here, I'll be right back." When his mother returned, Daniel's game was still running. The screen flashed insert coin. His Coke was half empty, sweating onto the table beside the machine. But Daniel was gone. At first, she thought maybe he'd followed a friend out, or slipped to the food court for a pretzel. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Panic set in. By the time mall security made an announcement over the PA system, Daniel had been gone too long. Witnesses remembered a boy matching his description near the exit, walking beside a man in a denim jacket. No one stopped them. No one thought twice. Daniel was never found. A year later, across the country, another story began to echo the same. Chilling rhythm. Summer of 1993, Clearwater Mall in Florida. 13-year-old Alicia Grant was last seen playing Dance Dance Revolution, laughing with two other girls. Her friends remembered her leaving for the restroom, a place just down the hall, brightly lit, right next to the arcade entrance. She never returned. Her backpack was discovered days later in a service stairwell behind the mall. Her case remains unsolved. 2 stories, 2 children, 2 very different malls. But already, patterns began to emerge. Each child was last seen in the arcade. one of the most public, crowded areas of the mall. Neither disappearance involved a struggle, a scream, or a dramatic chase. In both cases, the last signs of life were eerily ordinary: a soda, a backpack, a half-played game, and they weren't alone. Throughout the early to mid-90s, scattered across states like Texas, Michigan, California, and Pennsylvania, reports surfaced of children vanishing from mall arcades. The details blurred, but the threads remained consistent. A trusted public space, a short window of unsupervised time, and a disappearance so clean, so quick that no one noticed until it was too late. Parents began to whisper among themselves, could there be a connection? Police departments insisted these were isolated incidents, but two families sitting in empty bedrooms, staring at posters on walls that would never come down. The similarities were impossible to ignore. And then came the agonizing first hours. For every parent who returned to find their child gone, the reaction followed a terrible rhythm: disbelief, panic, then desperate searching. They ran store to store, shouting names, showing photos, begging employees to check bathrooms, back rooms, storage closets. Mall security made announcements. Shoppers were asked to look around, but the minutes ticked away in missing child cases. Investigators call the first 2 hours the golden window. It is the most crucial time frame to gather evidence, to intercept a suspect, to bring a child home safely. In the 90s, those hours slipped by faster than most realized. Phones weren't in every pocket. Security footage was rare, often grainy or non-existent. Mall parking lots were sprawling oceans of cars, every vehicle a potential getaway. Witnesses were distracted, caught up in their own errands, unable to recall details beyond a man in a jacket or a girl with dark hair. For the families, the agony began immediately. Mothers clutched half-empty soda cups. Fathers begged officers to check dumpsters, to lock down exits. Siblings searched hallways with tears in their eyes. But in nearly every case, the trail was already cold. The arcades kept buzzing, kept flashing, kept swallowing tokens. Other children laughed, unaware. Life inside the mall didn't stop. But for those parents, the world had ended in the blink of an eye. What frightened investigators most wasn't just the pattern of disappearances. It was the lack of disruption. Predators seemed to move invisibly. No struggle, no outcry. Just a child walking out one door and never being seen again. It was as if the arcade itself had swallowed them whole. If these disappearances had unfolded today, the response would look very different. Security footage would be pulled within minutes. Cell towers would ping phones. Amber alerts would flash across every screen, every highway sign, every police radio in the state. Witnesses would share photos instantly. A child's face would be impossible to miss. But this was the 1990s, and in the 1990s, investigators worked with shadows. The moment a child vanished, parents begged officers to check the cameras, but most malls didn't have them. If they did, the few cameras available were mounted near entrances, focused not on safety but on theft prevention. They were grainy, time-stamped wrong, and recorded on tapes that were often recycled after a week. By the time detectives asked for them, evidence was gone. Communication was another hurdle. There were no texts, no group alerts, no social media. Chains that could spread a missing child's description in seconds. Instead, parents relied on paper flyers hastily printed at local shops, taped to lampposts and bulletin boards. The faces of missing children stared down from supermarket walls, their names whispered in living rooms. But by then days had passed, and those days were everything in those early hours. Police often wrestled with a painful dilemma. Was the child truly abducted, or had they simply wandered off? In the 90s, protocol often required waiting 24 hours before classifying a child as officially missing. In that time, crucial leads dissolved. Cars drove away, witnesses forgot, evidence vanished. Consider the mall itself, a sprawling labyrinth. Dozens of stores, multiple exits, endless stairwells and service corridors. Once a child slipped beyond the arcade, they could disappear into the maze within seconds. By the time security responded, the trail was already cold, and then there were the suspects. Without digital databases, police relied on paper files, phone trees, and interdepartmental faxes. If a predator had offended in another state, there was no guarantee local investigators would ever know. Connections between cases were rarely drawn. Each department worked its own corner of the puzzle, never realizing the pieces might fit together. For families, this was agony. Imagine being a parent in 1994, sitting across from detectives who admitted they had no video, no clear witnesses, and no fast way to spread your child's face beyond the evening news. Every hour stretched into a lifetime. Every day felt like sand slipping through desperate fingers. The community stepped in, but even that was limited. Volunteers handed out flyers at mall entrances. Local news anchors repeated names and descriptions during the 6 o'clock broadcast. A child's disappearance became a shared wound, a topic murmured in church pews and grocery store aisles. But the truth lingered. Without technology, without speed, the response was always too slow. And in that slowness, the predators thrived. They knew malls didn't shut down immediately. They knew parking lots weren't locked at the first report of a missing child. They knew law enforcement worked with gaps wide, enough for them to vanish into. Detectives would later admit the frustration of chasing shadows. They had fragments, a denim jacket, a vague description of a man with dark hair, a car that might have been blue or green. But nothing concrete. Cold case files began to stack. Parents kept calling. Children's faces kept appearing on posters. And across the nation, the fear spread. If this could happen in the most public of places, where were children ever truly safe? The blind spots of 90s policing weren't born out of neglect. Officers worked tirelessly, combing parking lots, interviewing witnesses, piecing together timelines by hand. But they were outmatched by time, by distance, and by the very limits of the tools at their disposal. For many families, the last clear image of their child came not from a security camera or a cell phone photo, but from a wallet-sized school portrait smiling awkwardly in front of a painted backdrop. And those images, frozen in time, faded at the edges, became the symbols of an entire generation's unanswered questions. Years passed, but for the families left behind, time did not heal. It only deepened the silence. The empty bedrooms told the story best. Posters of rock bands faded under the sunlight that streamed through closed blinds. A shelf full of trophies. Gathered dust. A pair of sneakers stayed neatly by the door, waiting for feet that would never return. Parents often refused to move these things, as if leaving the rooms untouched could somehow freeze their child in time, waiting for the day they'd walk back through the door. Birthdays were the hardest. Cakes baked but never eaten, candles lit but never blown out. At holiday dinners, one chair always seemed to sit a little too empty. The laughter never quite as full as it once was. And still, The questions lingered: who had taken them? How had they slipped past so many people unnoticed? Were they still out there, watching, waiting? Communities felt the weight too. Malls that once bustled with carefree families grew quieter, shadows of their former selves. Parents held their children's hands tighter, unwilling to let them roam free. The arcade, once a symbol of independence, became a place many avoided. Its glowing lights now, reminders of what had been lost. In towns where these disappearances struck, the fear stretched across years. Teenagers who grew up in the shadow of these cases became adults who never forgot. They told their own children stories, warnings wrapped in cautionary whispers. Don't wander, don't go alone, don't trust the noise of the crowd to keep you safe. And then there were the cold case files, stacked in police departments, boxes labeled with names, faces taped to folders, leads that went nowhere, each one a wound still open. Detectives retired with these cases haunting their desks, never finding the answers families begged for. Every now and then, hope would flicker. A call came in. Someone thought they saw a girl matching Alicia's description. A stranger remembered a detail from years ago. A car parked near the arcade exit. A man lingering by the doors. For a moment, families would hold their breath. But more often than not, those leads faded, just like the others. And yet, the hope never fully died. Even decades later, some parents left porch lights burning. A silent signal to children who might somehow, against all odds, find their way back home. Others wrote letters to lawmakers, begging for renewed attention, for DNA testing, for modern forensics to re-examine evidence long thought useless. The weight of these disappearances went beyond grief. It reshaped a culture. Before the 90s, many parents believed public spaces were safe havens. Afterward, that illusion cracked. The mall, once a sanctuary of neon, laughter, and weekend freedom, became another place where predators could hide in plain sight. The message was chilling. Danger didn't always lurk in dark corners. Sometimes, it thrived under the brightest lights. To this day, the missing remain missing. Their names echo on lists of unsolved cases. Their faces still stare from aging posters, tucked into boxes or memorial walls online. For every name, a family still waits, suspended in a limbo between hope and despair. And perhaps the cruelest truth of all is this: without answers, there is no closure, only the long shadow of a moment that changed everything. From the distance of decades, the disappearances of the 1990s still whisper warnings. They remind us that innocence, once lost, can never fully return. The mall arcades, glowing, noisy, crowded, seemed untouchable. Yet they were never truly safe. And from that realization came change. In the years that followed, communities and lawmakers began to act. New protocols emerged, built from tragedy. Amber alerts now spread across phones, radios, and televisions within minutes. Security cameras are everywhere, not just in entrances, but in hallways, food courts, and parking lots. Missing persons databases connect jurisdictions instantly, ensuring patterns are harder to ignore. Parents, too, changed. What once was trust became vigilance. Where children were once left unsupervised for hours, they are now tracked, texted, checked in on constantly. The freedom of the 90s gave way to a culture of caution. The advances in forensic science brought new hope. DNA evidence, once considered useless without a match, can now be tested against massive databases. Cold cases from the 90s are being reopened, evidence re-examined, new suspects questioned. And though the answers are slow to come, they are no longer impossible. But beyond technology, beyond policy, there was a cultural shift. We learned, painfully, that danger does not always hide in shadows. Sometimes it lives in plain sight, in the most ordinary places, among the sounds of laughter and the glow of arcade lights. And yet, perhaps the most important lesson is one of memory. To remember these children is to refuse to let them vanish twice, once from the arcade and once from our collective memory. Their stories remind us of the fragility of safety, the urgency of awareness, and the responsibility we all share to protect the vulnerable. So the next time you pass an arcade, maybe tucked away in a retro corner of a mall, maybe reborn as a nostalgic novelty, listen closely. You'll still hear the echoes of quarters clinking, buttons clicking, children laughing. But behind the glow of those neon screens, there are shadows too. Shadows that remind us of what was lost. Shadows that demand we never forget. Because safety is not a given. It is something we build, protect, and guard together. And for the families who still wait, who still leave porch lights burning, who still hold onto school photos and faded posters, the lesson is simple but powerful. Awareness can save lives. Silence can cost them. The stories of the 90s mall arcades are not just relics of the past. They are warnings for the present. And they are calls to action for the future. So remember the names. Remember the faces. Remember the long shadow of those neon lights. Because somewhere, out there, the unanswered questions still remain.